outstanding as children. They were quite good, but they were also very curious and very interested, and they, over time, developed beyond their peers. They didn't start off that way. It wasn't just that they were much better than everyone else from the off. It's a developmental process. So your child, wherever they are now, it's just where they are now. It's all up for grabs in terms of change. Of course, as this kind of person here, Anders Ericsson from Florida State University, he would say, this question of potential, it's no point in looking at this question of potential because there are no innate constraints in terms of getting to high levels of performance. Now that's quite an extreme view. He's on the extreme end of thinking. So he's saying anyone can get there. With the right opportunities, the right support, the right motivation, anyone can get there. Now we could sit here, we could have a conversation about that, and different people would have different views on that statement, that everybody can get there. But what I'm saying to you is, it doesn't really matter whether you believe that everyone can get there. What we're sure about is it's more people than we thought. So the question of potential, we used to think ability was fixed and you were kind of destined to only get to a certain kind of level. I know when I was at school, I was at school in such a long time ago that we used to, in my class at school, you knew where you were in the class. So we used to sit certain tests and then you'd be told where you were in the class. And I was generally, I was 12th in my class at school. And in lessons that were a little bit boring, I used to think about that, think about the fact that I was 12th. And I used to contemplate, how can I get to be 11th? And after a great deal of consideration and thought, I reached a conclusion. And this was it. Someone would have to leave. That was the only way. I was destined to be 12th forever. And that's what I believed as a child. That's what I believed. That was just the rank order. I was 12th. And actually, that's a very dangerous thing, because if that's what you think, then that's what you will be. So what I'm simply saying is be open-minded as a parent about what your child can do. As a teacher, be open-minded about what your students can do. Because actually, this question of where they are now versus where they're going to be later, we just don't know. I sometimes kind of refer to that in terms of, like, if you learn to drive, the people who pass the driving test first, you know, some people pass the driving test after just a few lessons. Are they ultimately the best drivers? Well, not necessarily. Sometimes it's, you know, it's slow and steady gets you there. The fact is, it doesn't matter how quickly you master something, it's whether you master it. So be a bit patient and don't assume that because your child doesn't master it first time that they won't be able to. They very well may be able to. So back to the little equation then, and on to the kind of questions. So that was potential. Well, what's this business of opportunities then? Well, it's sort of self-evident, isn't it? That you can't do well without having opportunities made available to you. You know, you can't get to play the violin. You can't get to play the violin at a major concert without having learned the violin. So somebody had to make the decision to allow you to take up the instrument and have the lessons. So opportunities are really important. This, as I said, this summer I was glued to the Olympics along with the whole of the rest of London and most of England. And these are, on the picture on the left is Regent Bolt. And he won the 100 metres, the 200 metres, and got a world record in the sprint relay. So no slacker. What's kind of interesting, and the person on the right is Michael Johnson, who was the previous world record holder. And what's kind of interesting about them is that Michael Johnson has talked quite a lot about Usain Bolt. And what he says is that Usain Bolt is a very interesting runner. He comes from Jamaica. And Jamaica, some of you may know this, athletics is very big in Jamaica. And he did very well very early in his running. And so normally if athletes do well in Jamaica, they go on to college in the United States on a sports scholarship. But because Usain Bolt did very well very early, he was too young to go to a college in the US. So he stayed in Jamaica. The consequence of that is that he did not have quite such sophisticated training. And training is really important. Michael Johnson runs a sports institute that trains runners in very precise things like helping you with your start or helping you with the middle part of the race. And he says that he says two things. One is that if Usain Bolt was undertaking that kind of training, then he could probably go even faster than he is now, even faster than his current world record. But he also says that he, Michael Johnson, was so trained that running became such a technical activity that he stopped being able to be natural and fluent. So in the end, it sort of stopped him going quite as far as he could go. And that's a really kind of interesting thing, which is that training is really, really helpful. But if you drill people too far, then it becomes counterproductive. So that's the same with your children, is that helping them when they do their homework is really good, but actually drilling them too far, making them do it again and again and again and again, actually can become counterproductive. And it can certainly demotivate them. Another point to kind of bear in mind is that it really does help to get a bit of help. So all of us are better if we get the right kind of help. And to give you one more example before I finish with athletics, and you can tell it has been quite a summer for it, the winner of the 5,000 metres and the 10,000 metres was someone from the UK called Mo Farah. Some of you may know this. Mo Farah is a kind of interesting guy in that he was regularly running races for years, and he was about 10th in the world. And you might think, well, being 10th in the world is pretty good, so be content with that. But he wasn't, and he wanted to get better. And he changed his coach 12 months ago. And that coach has trained him in a slightly different kind of way, and the consequence is he's shot up from 10th to 1st in the world. And again, that's to do with giving the right opportunities and getting the right kind of support. So the help and support that you get makes a considerable difference. So the things in the oval part are the changeable things, and they're the things that we need to concentrate on. So opportunities and support and motivation. So this is a very interesting fact. This comes from a book called Outliers, which some of you may know. It's in the kind of airport, those kind of business books that you often find in the airport. It's actually a really good book because Malcolm Gladwell that wrote this, he wrote Outliers. He's summarised what is the academic literature and presented it in a kind of easy, digestible, journalistic kind of way, but it's absolutely accurate in terms of the academic literature. And this particular thing is that if you want to be really good at something, it takes about 10,000 hours to get there. Of course, the converse does not apply. If you do 10,000 hours of something, it doesn't guarantee you're an expert. But if you're trying to get to expertise, it takes a lot of time. So one of the things that I think is important to think about in relation to that is that your child only spends a certain amount of time in school. It spends a great deal more time with you at home. So if you want to be really good at mathematics, for example, it's no good just doing maths lessons. You have to kind of think about maths, talk about maths, play with maths, right from an early age. And some children do. Of course, it really is helpful if your family are interested in the same kinds of things. And that's why people think that, a person who is good at a particular subject and comes from a family where other people are good at it, that it must all run in families. But that's not entirely true, because I'll give you a little example from my own extended family. I have a brother-in-law and a sister-in-law, and they had young children, and I went round for tea, and their 4-year-old daughter was very excited about it, because she told me as soon as she let me in the door that we were going to have cake. And this was a particularly exciting experience, because in her household cake was a treat and a special occasion, so she was very pleased that my arrival meant they were going to have cake, right? So she said we're going to have cake, and she was desperate for us to cut into this cake and get on with it. So her dad said to her, Catherine, do you want to ask Auntie Deb about the cake? What size of cake does she want? And Catherine, age 4, said to me, yes. She said, how many degrees would you like? And it's not many 4-year-olds that ask you that kind of question. But she has a family which is, you know, a mum who's a mathematician and a dad who's a physicist. And that's kind of, you know, it wasn't as bizarre as you think in their particular family. But then it's not surprising when she goes to school that she looks like she's better at maths than anybody else, because she's been kind of talking about it all the time. It's just part of their daily life. But in a similar kind of way, you know, I watched, I was at a barbecue with some people, and I was in the middle of a kind of conversation with this guy, and he said, could you just hold it a minute there? I just want to go down to see my son. And his son, who was aged about 3, he was trying to kick the football. And his father, who was a professional footballer for quite a small club, but he's a professional footballer, he was watching his son, and he went over and he just positioned his foot differently and said, now try kicking it that way. And it was much more successful. So again, that was a kind of a little bit of coaching. And I think my third example is that quite close to where I live in Oxford, there's a very wide piece of pathway, and it had been raining, and it had all kind of dried up except there was a big puddle. And I watched this little scene unfold where a little girl, again a sort of quite young child, she let go of her mum's hand. She ran right through the puddle on purpose in her canvas shoes. And I thought, I wonder what's going to happen now. As the mother approaches, I'm just idly thinking what's going to happen. And the mother bent down to the child and she said, wiggle your toes and tell me how that feels. And I thought, that is a university family. Because that's a family where right from being very young, the child is being asked, what is your view on that? What is the consequence of doing that? What do you think about that? And, you know, coming from a university city as I do in Oxford, sometimes you can feel that parents take that a little too far. And certainly if you're a teacher in the audience here, I can tell you that there are some children that when they start school, when you say, I think it's, you know, I'd like you to do this, you do have children who, you know, say, well, I would prefer to do it that way and I don't really want to do that, because they've been brought up in a culture where their opinion is as valuable as their parents'. So they have to learn how to socialise all of that. But the idea that you have views of your own and you encourage your child to have a view and to shape their view and share their view is really important. But you have to do it kind of sensitively, but it's important. So practice, practice, practice. And how do you get them to be motivated? If I had a little money for every parent who's asked me, how do I get my child to be more motivated? And I have to tell you, there's a bit of a gender split here. I am more likely to be asked this about boys than I am about girls. Not always, but it is quite likely. Well, the answer is that motivation's quite a complex thing. But what motivates some people more than others? Well, this is from another book that you might have read by Daniel Pink. And Daniel Pink says that motivation, we've always thought motivation was all about carrot and stick. You know, if you do it well, you get a present, and if you do it badly, we'll punish you. But actually, maybe our thinking about motivation is changing, and that motivation is much more personal than that. People tend to be motivated by having a bit of freedom and autonomy, so a bit of choice about what they do. They're more likely to be motivated if they've made a choice. So someone asked me quite recently, they said, you know, I've got a small toddler and they won't eat. What should I do? I don't know that I'm a guru on this matter, but anyway, I thought I'd give my opinion. And I said, instead of, you know, try this bit of choice, you know, instead of trying to force them to eat one particular thing, put two things out there and say, which one would you like? Because choice makes a difference. Purpose is also really important. In terms of my own children, I have two children, they're both adults now. They never allowed me to talk about them when I was doing this kind of talk when they were growing up, but I feel it's quite safe because I'm on the other side of the world from where I live, and they are now adults. But my son was a terrible person for this. If he would not do anything unless you give him a reason for why he had to do it. So he absolutely would not do it. It was like, you know, he would find distractions, he would find reasons not to, but he always wanted to know why. And when he first went to school, he used to say, why don't they explain why we're doing it? Why do they just keep asking me to do things? Why don't they explain why we're doing it? And actually, although it's not possible to do that all of the time, it does help children to make sense of the world, and it motivates them. And for some children, it's a very powerful motivator indeed. Mastery. We've come to understand that actually learning to master things is a very powerful idea for people, generally for people, all of us. Instead of saying, you know, whether you're good or bad at something, to actually think about, can I do that next step? And I was having this conversation with one of my neighbours recently, and she was asking me about something I'd been doing, and I said, well, I'd just been saying to particular parents that if your child comes home from school and says, you know, I find my maths really hard, and I don't want to do it, and I'm, you know, is miserable and unhappy about it, I said, you know, you shouldn't say to them, you shouldn't try to comfort them by saying, well, never mind, you know, I was never very good at maths either, so, you know, don't worry. Because if you say that, then you can be sure they're not going to be very good at maths, because they're going to believe that, you know, they've inherited the I can't do maths gene. And therefore, you know, it's okay because nobody can do it, so that's all right. What you have to do is go the opposite extreme, and you have to be very enthusiastic about maths. And I hope my colleague who's sitting in the audience today won't mind me borrowing from his children, who are also halfway across the other side of the world, Mark, so they won't hear, is that Mark makes a virtue of that particular point with his own children about young children just being so excited when they bring their maths homework home, so that they feel that same excitement about maths, because that makes maths not scary, it makes it really interesting. And so what you project, your children pick up on. And if you project positive thoughts about particular things, they will feel positive about them. And that's part of the reason why children who pick up sort of family traits about the things that are valued in their family and their family like and enjoy, and they become part of that too. So autonomy, mastery and purpose, they kind of, they're probably likely to help more with motivation. And it's interesting in this book by Daniel Pink, he talks about, you know, why do people do things? And he says, you know, motivation isn't just about reward. Reward can help. But if you look at something like, say, Wikipedia, all those entries in Wikipedia, nobody asked anyone to write them, nobody paid anyone to write them. An entire encyclopedia of information that people have just contributed. Now we take that for granted, but if you sort of rewind back quite a way, there was a time when Wikipedia hadn't started, hadn't been invented, when Microsoft were commissioning an entire online, and some of you may remember this far back, online encyclopedia called Encarta. And if you'd said at that time, okay, there's going to be two possibilities here, one of which is a specially commissioned encyclopedia, comprehensive encyclopedia, commissioned and online at everybody's disposal, and the other is going to be something that people just contribute to and make up on ad hoc and you know, just decide what goes in and what they say. Which of the two is going to be most successful? Most people would have said it would be Encarta, but history tells us otherwise. Encarta, dead and buried. Wikipedia, very alive. And that's because people are motivated to contribute. They want to do it. So part of what you want to do with your children, whether you're parents or teachers, is to motivate them to want to contribute, to want to master things, to want to do well. Of course, they do come in all personality types. And out there is the dolphin, ahead of everybody, eager, anxious, enthusiastic, ready to do anything. Always the first one, always volunteering, up there, ready, absolutely brilliant, really, really good, off and ready to go. It's wonderful if your child is like that. You're very fortunate. Of course, you also get the little puppy who's, motivated, but a bit nervous about it, really. May or may not be able to do it. Not likely to volunteer, may need a bit of encouragement. Not so bold as the dolphin. Down here in your bottom left, that's the sloth. Of course, they would do it if only they had the energy, or if only they had the time, or if only there wasn't something else that was in the way, or if only. Well-intentioned but never kind of get there. And some of you may have that kind of child too, where you're kind of pushing all the time, saying, yes, it'll be great, why don't you do that? And they're like, yes, maybe, well, maybe next time. And it's always difficult to get them started. And then there's the bears. The bears, well, they're kind of, they're really